Hello, it's Eli Machen again, and today I want to talk to you about rituals and triggers. Now, we've talked in the past around wounds, and where the wounds come from is not only just our family of origin, it comes from growing up, it can come from schoolmates and environments and situations in neighborhoods, and it can come from our adult lives. Research is showing us more and more today that there's a lot of trauma that happens to us in our adult life that generates a lot of shame. And what those messages of shame is, it's usually about us, negative messages about who we are. And so when we walk through life and we go through a trigger-rich environment, it could be at work, it could be on the way back and forth to work. When we get triggered from our environment, something outside is beginning to trigger that shame with a message, something about us, then we're going to move into a strategy to medicate or to correct that message. And then we're thrown into our cycle of beginning to preoccupy about our acting out, our choice of either our behavior or our substance abuse and whatever we're doing, to begin to act out, plan our day, plan our acting out or whatever we're going to do around that. And then we go through our rituals about how do we do that. Our step process, which we're going to cover, is that how do we go from the fantasy or the preoccupation about our addictive use or behavior all the way through the step-by-step process until we do our acting out, whether we're drinking, drugging, or sex, or process addiction. And when we get to this, and then it ultimately always leads us back around to despair. We can cycle around in that shame and guilt as we go through this, and then it leads us back to the messages that shame gave us again. And we're right back here again in the cycle going around again. Now, how do we stop this? How do we put a brakes on here before it gets there? Now, we're going to talk about what do we do with the wounds and our shame. Bottom line, if you're staying here constantly fighting the triggers in the environment, what we know in research is that you've got problems with unresolved shame and wounds here that you got to go back and do some trauma work. You need to work with a therapist that can work with you and do that deeper inner work around trauma. And I would recommend doing some of the more, talk therapy won't cut that. You got to use psychodrama, experiential therapy, EMDR, brain spotting. There's a lot of new technology that's coming out today that therapists are being trained in that can use non-invasive, non-intrusive type of trauma work that allows you to work through that without having to go back and what we did in the early days when I first started all this. So I recommend this. I'm just going to throw that out there right quick. There's a lot of therapists out there that can do this. Make sure your therapist can. Now, how do we stop this whole process here until you can deal with the wounds? This is key, and this is what we want to work on. First of all, we look at all the triggers that may be out there. Now, these are not pre-trigger states. These are triggers. These are things that we are in a pre-trigger state, and all of a sudden these triggers come along, and they can be something emotional, something that's said or done, or we're watching or observing or whatever else. A song on the radio, something as innocent as a song on the radio at work or somewhere, or you can walk through a store. I mean, I can remember one time feeling really sad about something, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I said, what's going on? All of a sudden, I was in a good mood walking into the store, and I'm walking around some department store, and they're playing some song in the backdrop, and it's some kind of, it's a song about, despair and abandonment and rejection. And I wasn't even aware of the song. It was so quiet in my background. It sent me down a rabbit hole. It could be some person that you're around. Even they show up, or it could be a boss at work. It could be an employer at work. It could be somebody else at work. It could be hair and body parts, memories, criticism, work situations, a fight with your spouse, different smells, movies. All of these things can cause you to be triggered, especially when you're in a pre-trigger state. That's when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed. Then you're set up to go here with these. These will send you over the edge. Now, how do we break down this cycle? How do you know this? Where do you stop going around and around and around in your addictive cycle? Well, what I've done is I've taken the cycle and I've cut it in half. So from the fantasy of the pre-trigger state all the way over to your acting out, and then let's break this down and do an analysis. Part of the program that you're working today, the things that you check in every day and you hit buttons, I mean, I've designed that after working in this field for over 20 years, is that I know what gets addicts to flip the switch and go over into doing things and acting out. I know this trigger cycle. I've worked thousands of these things with clients over the years. So I know that. And so you checking in every day and hitting those buttons is helping you to break down this whole process. Let's go through it and I'll show you the pictures that go along with it. Bottom line, you're in a pre-trigger state. Basically, you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed out. Then you're in a pre-trigger state so that these triggers, the ones I talked about in just the last slide, is that those come along and then you're off and running. And you're not long. Some individuals go from here to here in seconds. Others, this ritual could last either weeks or months. It could be a long time before you go this. That's why sometimes alcoholics will say, well, I'll only drink every 3 months or 6 months. That doesn't make me an alcoholic, does it? Well, it does if your ritual is this long. If you only go on drug binges every so often. Well, if your ritual, you break it down, you look at it, yeah, you're acting out here every 6 months maybe, or once a year. However, what happens is back here, you've got a ritual, I guarantee you, that goes from year to year. And as you work this program, you're going to begin to see that as your graphs begin to show you how you begin to escalate in your pre-trigger states and what's triggering you and what you are or are not doing in your program when you get here. So it's not you wake up one day and you're drunk or you're drugged or you're acting out sexually. All of a sudden, like, wow, I don't know how this happened. Well, this will help you. Now, it's better not to go back and look at it. She says, if you're trying to figure it out over here, and you says, my life, what's happening? Well, you're already down the rabbit hole. Your life is in the middle of a tornado, and it's a little too late to try to figure out how I'm going to stop doing this. When you're sitting there, you're walking through the door of a bar, or you're walking through the door of a strip bar, or you're walking through the door or into a situation, a street corner or something where you know where a drug pusher is and you're buying drugs. I mean, that's a little late. We need to back it all the way up to back here. So one of the things we're going to look at is that not only what happened here, but what I want you to do is you draw this out and you begin to work it. And for those of you who've been through some of our workshops, you've done this. Those of you who hadn't, I recommend you doing this. I recommend you sitting down and going over this with your sponsor or your therapist so that you can break down what happened right before you're acting out, whether it was drinking, whether it was drugs, whether it was sex, whatever it was, what happened here? And then you start backing up. Then what happened before that? And what happened before that? And so you're breaking it up into either days, minutes, months, whatever, between your acting out. I'll guarantee you have a pattern that you repeat on a regular basis until you can back it all the way back up to where back here to where you've got your progress, you've got the whole progression of your ritual from the pre-trigger state all the way through. Now, I'm going to go into more details around boundaries and what you need to do, but this is some of the ones that you should have. I mean, if it's around pornography or sexual addiction, then you need to have filters or accountability software on your computers. Stay away from certain movies with sexual content. Change your cell phone number. People who, especially if you're in drugs and you've had contacts, eliminate your cell phone address. Get those phone numbers out. Sit down with a sponsor and eliminate all those contacts so that you can't go back to those haunts. Don't drive in certain routes if you know that there's a lot of sexual triggers or there's a lot of triggers around drugs. I mean, you might take roads without even thinking about it, going down some certain roads where you know, subconsciously at least, that there are pushers on those roads. And that's where you used to buy drugs. Well, if you go back to those places, it's going to trigger you. You're going to start jonesing. You're going to start wanting to use. If it's going by bars that you have had a lot of connection with and a lot of community with, well, if you go back down that way, then I'm going to tell you, you just got to avoid that. You can't go there. Avoid eye contact when you're with outside relationships. When you go certain places where you have to go, where they may be drinking, like a party, then be accountable with somebody that you go to this place that you won't touch, you won't use. Now, these are just some of the other things. For those of you who are drugs, that struggle with drug use, be accountable to somebody, even if you have to do a urine test on a regular basis, a lie detector test. Do something that keeps you bound in, that you don't go there. You just don't go there. Now, as we break down the cycle, and if you're thinking that you're going to deal with your acting out and stop doing it when you're right here, it's just not going to happen. I got a call one time, and I must have been 7th or 8th on the list. I don't usually go on the call for guys in recovery. I'm not a sponsor. I don't want to sponsor guys like that. I do my own sponsors in my own recovery group. But he called me, he's in the hotel room, and he's in the bathroom calling me on his cell phone. And I'm trying to say, well, what's going on? He says, I'm real close to acting out. And all of a sudden I hear this lady's voice from the bedroom calling him. And he says, well, at least I made the call, and he hangs up. Well, the next day he gets on the group call. He said, well, at least I called. Well, that's trying to make the phone call here. You know, your hair's on fire. You're done. I mean, that's a really late time to try to break down. It usually doesn't happen. You usually don't stop there. Now, the key is put the boundaries out here. Put them all the way out at the beginning of your rituals. As you've already broken down the analysis, put your boundaries out here that's safe. Once you do that, then you're going to begin to realize that you stay sober. Now, I don't want you to stop there. I want you to look at something else. Not only you step into boundaries here, but you get triggered, or you're in a pre-trigger state, you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, and stressed, that I want you to think about this. Is that, all right, I got my boundaries in place. Now, okay, and I'm not acting out, I'm not drugging, and I'm not drinking, and whatever else. Good. But now ask yourself another question, and I want you to look at this. I want you to stop for a minute and think. You know, why am I here? What is going on in my life? I think it's important that you ask yourself, what am I feeling? I would encourage you to say, where do I feel it? You know, some guys feel it here, or they feel it in their chest, or their gut, or their back. I used to carry a lot of it in the back of my neck and my shoulders. You know, it's like I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world. Well, that for me was a pre-trigger state. And this is so as I begin to understand what I'm feeling, it begins to slow me down. The trap door won't shut as quickly because these boundaries have allowed me to keep the trap door open so I can access my higher level thinking. As I begin to say, well, what am I feeling? How old is that feeling? How old do I feel right now? Well, that may be an indicator that I'm down what I call the rabbit hole, and I'm already down the rabbit hole, and I'm at some young age. Well, now's the time where I begin to make the calls and tell somebody, this is where I am, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm doing, and I can do a real check-in. Here. That won't happen here. The trap door's already shut. Now, what we're going to do is the next time we're together, we're going to discuss some of the tools that you're going to need, that I needed, that I use even today to help me with this process of breaking this thing down and not going to this place here. I don't want to go here anymore. And so part of the boundaries is, a lot of what the boundaries will be used is our program. If I'll use the tools in my program, then I don't ever have to go here again. And that's what we'll talk about next time we're together. Thank you.